Welcome to Musicians Roundtable. I'm Jeffrey Goodman. I'm here in Los Angeles, and my guest today is David Leisner, who is in Manhattan. And today we're going to discuss the rather, until recently, obscure 19th century composer Matiegka, and there are about 15 pronunciations of his name, depending on the time of the day and the person that you're speaking with. But welcome, David, and how are you doing today?
Thanks, Jeff. I'm doing fine. It's a bit of a cloudy, rainy day today, and it's going to rain all day tomorrow too. But it's not dampening my spirits, at least not yet.
Spirits hopefully will not be too dampened. So uh, I was so happy to notice that there's been a digital re-release of your really magnificent album of Macieka compositions for the guitar. And so I was wondering if you would just begin by telling us about how you discovered this composer and what were those circumstances?
Well, first of all, the reason for the digital re-release of the album was because we had noticed recently, just before I made my newest recording for the Uzika label, that the Matiegka album had no digital presence. And then we looked back, and sure enough, there was no digital presence since its CD release in 2009. And so Azika decided to redress that issue and re-release it just less than 2 months ago. So hopefully now it will regain some attention that perhaps it didn't get in 2009. In terms of how I discovered Matiegka, it was a roundabout story, actually. I had been given a book in England of assembled manuscripts that were in the collection of a person named Stephen Pratton. And Pratton was a British guitarist and sometime composer, apparently, but at the time I knew nothing about him. And among the many manuscripts that were in there was a manuscript of a sonata entitled Grand Sonata that I at the time thought that I'd never seen before. In fact, uh, the, I assumed that it was by Stephen Pratton. There was no composer name listed in the music. And so I played this piece in public. I thought this piece was probably the best guitar sonata of the 19th century. And I thought, well, this is very significant, written by a man I've never heard of. And I did all kinds of extensive research on Stephen Pratton, including, genealogical stuff from British libraries and so on. So I've become the world's expert on Stephen Pratton. And as it turns out, I played the piece. I was in Australia, was on a tour in Australia in 2004. And somebody came up to me in Sydney after the concert and said, the second movement of that Grand Sonata is, I'm quite sure, a piece that was in the Oxford, was it the Trinity Oxford series, for teaching purposes. And he said, I'm pretty sure it was by Matiegka. And I looked it up, and sure enough, it was. And sure enough, the rest of the piece was by this composer that was a vague, acquaintance of mine in terms of research that I had done. And then I actually remembered that many, many years ago, going actually into your terrain in LA, when I lived in LA, I went to the UCLA library and was an avid reader, and I read through virtually everything in the guitar collection in the UCLA library. And I had remembered that I had read through this sonata by Matiegka. I must have been 18, 17 years old. So at that time, I really didn't have enough to go on, didn't know to be impressed. as I was later by the music. So once I rediscovered Matiegka at this point and understood that it was him, then I looked for all the music that I could find by him and found it in various libraries and a few published editions, and just came to feel that he was certainly one of the most important 19th century composers for guitar, if not the most important, which I still feel that he is, actually. At the very least, I think that Mertz and Matiegka are the most important early 19th century composers for the guitar. And there's lots of great stuff to be said for Sor, Giuliani, Regondi, and others, but Matiegka to me is a cut above the others.
Well, certainly, I only discovered his music relatively recently, about 4 years ago, after hearing his A minor sonata in a concert. And I immediately got Opus 31, these sonatas, and was just astonished to see his inventiveness and how much influence that he was under of Beethoven. The Sor and Giuliani and a number of those composers, as brilliant as they were, really were much more tightly connected to an early Mozart model of composing. Mozart, though, without the rhythmic invention and phrase design.
Exactly.
And and Matiegka is just full of fabulously interesting musical gestures, and also has that larger scale feeling for form that it takes a real composer to be able to write a sonata.
Exactly. He's a master of the sonata like none of the others, except for the Paganini sonata, of course, which sometimes is played as a solo piece. And the Paganini sonata is a beautifully composed sonata. Yeah, I agree. And also, Matiegka learned a lot from Haydn. There's a lot of stealing going on from Haydn, quite literally, actually. The Opus 23 sonata is at least half Haydn. So.
Yes, and that's another element that when I got the original Haydn, which I believe was for harpsichord, and if you compare the Haydn original that he used as the foundation and how he, I won't say translated, but he was inspired to transform it into a guitar piece with his own personality.
Exactly.
It is a fabulous lesson of the limitations and the mistake of being too literal in arrangements that are literally just how many of these notes can I put into and play on my guitar. And it's a great reflection of, I think, his composer's imagination and viewpoint.
Exactly. I totally agree.
So now your album that's been thankfully released in the digital format has a very varied repertoire in it. And I wonder if we could go through some of the entries on it. So I think that the Grand Sonata number 1 is one that you have on there. And could you speak about how you view that sonata within his work?
Well, certainly within his work and within the larger guitar repertoire of the era, as I said, I think it towers above all the other pieces of the era. It's particularly the last movement. The last movement is a masterpiece of imagination and inventiveness, using the same words as you, because you have used the same words as I do when I talk about Matiegka. I feel very strongly about the fertile quality of his imagination and his invention. The last movement is remarkably rich. I mean, it covers such a range of style and just kinds of material. I mean, it even ventures into a passage which I consider almost a precursor of minimalism, which is kind of amazing. It's very, very unusual for the time. And the first movement is also extraordinary. It's just a tightly composed, again, imaginative movement, and the second movement is moving and invites a lot of variety of interpretation, I think. And in my case, I added a cadenza in the second movement, which I think is called for at one point. So that's, like all of Matiekka's music, it invites many different interpretations because there's a lot of detail of marking and dynamics, unlike most of the other guitar composers of the era. And with all that, with all those markings on the page, it then opens up to the questions of, well, how did they interpret those markings at that time? And that's a really crucial matter, how you interpret those markings. So all of which is to say that that this sonata is very, very rich in material for interpretation, and has some very deep composerly thinking in it. It's the kind of piece that I think, I haven't played it in a while. I think when I come back to it, I'll find all kinds of new ways of interpreting it because it's that kind of music.
Yes, I think that the richness and abundance of all the articulations and all of the dynamics and also some for me, very unusual techniques for right hand and also even left hand in some circumstances. In one of his movements, we may find more articulations and dynamics than the entire works of Sor. That doesn't mean that, I don't think for a moment that he played his music with the kind of homogeneity that's suggested by the publications. I wouldn't dream of that.
Yes.
But unfortunately, it's left so many guitarists with a very kind of flat and one-dimensional viewpoint of the music. And you cannot encounter Matiekka without every single time experiencing all the indications that he gave and really contemplating what was his intent and what are the possibilities. And that's a dream come true for me as a guitarist. I was always much less interested in 19th century music because of the sterility of presentation to some degree.
Exactly. Well, you and everybody else, because the way that people were interpreting that music for such a long time was done without a deep study of how to play the music of that era, how to phrase it, how to structure it. And it's simply, in my case, it was simply rectified by listening a lot to pianists and playing the 19th century repertoire and studying the scores while listening to their interpretation. And that gave me a very solid background in interpretation of the music that we have.
I think one of the most expressive and inspired movements is the Andante con espressione from the Grand Sonata No. 2, which I know I'm very happy that you've recorded that. Can you just discuss that a bit for us?
Well, first of all, I think I would say that movement is a standout for me in the Grand Sonata No. 2. Other people will disagree, but I feel, first of all, that Matiekka is in general, can be an uneven composer. And so even in a piece like this Grand Sonata, his first and third movements didn't approach the profundity of the second movement, which I feel is truly profound, and in a way that really harkens to Beethoven. It is one of the most Beethoven-esque movements or pieces on the album. It is very deeply felt, profound movement, and you really need to live with it a while and kind of mine it for its depth, for its intelligence, for its musicality. Um, and once you start mining it, you keep discovering more and more. In many ways, it's quite a simple piece, but in many ways it isn't. There's lots of surprise in it, as there is with Beethoven, and I love that element of surprise. Matiegka really is the only composer of all the other guitar composers that we know that has that element of surprise in his writing. The others tend to be, more, forgive me, pedestrian in their approach. And this movement is a beautiful example of the rich nature of his imagination.
Absolutely, yes. Uh, one of my, this is a very recent discovery, but his variations on the Tyrolean song, Opus 27, that you've recorded, is a fascinating theme and variations, which instantly surprises me musically. And there's, I don't know how many 19th century theme and variations I have in my library, but it's a very big stack. And most of them, personally, I will only read once. But
Yes.
this is one that really is captivating. And I'm wondering if you can discuss that a little bit.
I adore the Opus 27 variations. I adore this piece. And I've got to tell you that when I was working on this album, I went to a couple of pianists to coach me on them. One was Seymour Bernstein, who I often go to as a mentor. I worked on some of the movements with him, but I worked on the entire album with pianist Richard Good,
Wow.
uh, who was an amazing coach and is certainly one of my and probably one of your favorite living pianists. He's a great, great musician. When Richard loved the music of Matiegka, and when he heard this piece, the Opus 27 Variations, he said, that's a piece I could see transcribing and arranging for the piano. As a guitarist, I couldn't believe it. I love hearing that. Like, when does a pianist ever say that? The only other time I've heard a pianist say that was for the Mertz elegy. When Richard Good said that about these variations, it confirmed my love for this piece. It is just, every variation is a gem, even just unto itself. Never mind the way that he structures it and evolves the variations so beautifully and incorporates different dance styles and minuets and I don't remember now. It's been a while since I looked at the score. And then there's a capriccio movement, which is very capricious and I think can be played with a lot of liberty. And there's imitations of cymbalum and horn and all kinds of things going on that when you deeply get to study the piece, you find all these things that are there in the piece, and it's an extensive piece. I think it's around 14 minutes of music, and it just never lets you go. It's just a beautifully, beautifully composed piece. I just adore it, and I don't know that anybody else has taken it up. I hope they do.
Uh, it it's. I think that there is going to be quite a bit of new discovery and exploration, and so many people are going to benefit from the work that you've done. Also, Stanley Yates and David Starobin's contributions all kind of come together. It will be, I think it's in early July. He will have. We will celebrate hopefully his 249th birthday,
Oh my
and
goodness.
And I think that um, that's something that if he could look down and see the world has dusted off his pretty much forgotten things, uh, and the shadowy figure is coming into the light. And thanks to so much to what you guys have been doing, I'm personally really appreciative of it.
Thanks.
Um, I wanted to see if you would discuss the Sonata in B minor, the Opus 31 number 6 that you also recorded.
Yes. Well, the B minor sonata is, for my way of thinking, the strongest piece of the group of six sonatas that comprise the Opus 31 sonatas. Um, it's a group of progressive sonatas in that, you know, it starts with the easier sonata and then gradually increases in not only difficulty but complexity of musical thought. So by the time he gets to number 6, he's really working with some rather complex musical material and a truly well developed, beautiful sonata. It's just a very powerful piece. Every movement is a gem, and the, um, the middle movement, the scherzo, again is the most Beethoven-like. It's again it has lots of surprise and is very Beethovenian, which I love about it. The first movement is very contrapuntal, and you don't get much of that in the music of that era, in the guitar literature. And the last movement is just a marvelous rondo form that's just, you know, infectious. You can just, even though there's quite a bit of repetition in it, I feel like I could listen to it over and over again. It's just delightful. It's a delightful movement.
Absolutely, yes. And then you have a few of more individual movements. You have minuets from his Opus 15, the 12 minuets. And I'm wondering if you might discuss why you chose those minuets of the others that he had written.
I wanted to represent the minuets, both the couple that I recorded from Opus 15 and the one that I recorded from Opus 20, which is a very large collection of miscellaneous pieces. Um, I think they're awfully good pieces. I think he must have felt close to the minuet because also in the Opus 27 variations, there's a minuet movement that's very beautiful and charming. And he really was very good with minuets and obviously wrote a lot of them. The Opus 15 collection has 12, I think, minuets. And I wanted, at the very least, to give a nod to that opus number because I think it's a significant collection in the guitar repertoire. And I just chose two of my favorites. I mean, I have probably at least four favorites in the set, and I don't remember anymore, but I imagine it was quite hard for me to make that decision to single out just these two because there's a number of them that are really extraordinary little pieces. But I love playing them. I think they're wonderful to play, and I think they're beautiful to listen to. I think they should be heard a lot more than they are.
Oh, definitely, definitely. I don't think that in all the decades that I went to see major classical guitar concerts in Los Angeles, endless Segovia, very occasionally John Williams, every 15 years or so he would come by, and Bream and Parkman and the Romeros. Never a single movement of this magnificent composer, and it shows how deeply unknown and forgotten he was. Because I believe that, for instance, I think if Julian Bream had been given uh, in a timely way for his career some manuscripts, I think he would have dug in and done some wonderful things with it.
Well, you never know. I mean, Bream didn't like Mertz very much, for example. So you know, we don't know what Bream would have made of this composer.
Yes.
You know, it's to each his own. It's possible that maybe he even did know about Matiegka and didn't like him. I don't know. Um, I can't imagine that this man who I idolize above just about every guitarist would have not shared my opinion that Matiegka was a great guitar composer. But you know, everybody's got their opinions, so we don't know really. I
We
never
don't
asked him
know.
about it.
Yes, in my idealized form of Bream, I think that he would have been receptive. But you're absolutely right. And if he didn't like it, he wasn't going to do anything, and that's fine.
Right,
There's room for all of those things.
absolutely.
Um, and then I think it's the last entry in your CD is the Etude in C major, and which you mentioned, I think, is number 21 in Miscellaneous Studies, published by Francesco Gorio. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
No.
Yeah, that's it's just a beautiful little piece. It's just one of those pieces I could play over and over and over again. It's just a sublime little piece. Um, what can I say? It's a very, very simple piece. I think it's deeply felt. And I felt it was a beautiful, perfect way to end the recording. In those days when people actually listened to a CD from beginning to end, now people rarely do that. But um, in that context, I thought the Etude was a beautiful little quiet encore to the album.
Absolutely. Well, um, I think that he has much room to go up. I also think that his music has a tremendous, I don't know exactly what word to use, but a kind of a flexibility that will attract fine performers with very different temperaments. And the there is a dramatic lyrical quality. There is the Beethovenian power of narrative and charismatic development of his musical ideas that are just just so inspiring to hear. It's a side note, but I'm also very happy about my own discovery of his music because there are numerous pieces that intermediate and even slightly below intermediate guitarists can get into and play the whole thing, as opposed to so many of
Exactly.
the well-known composers of the 19th century guitar repertoire. There's stuff that's just too hard for people who haven't developed their playing,
That's right.
and and it also has that context of, let's consider, what do you think this dynamic means? What do you think? What would you do here with this fermata? How long would you hold it? What does it mean? There's so many wonderful things that I've never been able um, to work with more intermediate students on. That this is prime ground, I think, for teachers as well as players and advanced players, of course.
I totally agree. Absolutely. And by the way, on another side note, we've been talking about how little people played him. That was especially in this country, in over in Europe, he was a little better known. Not a lot, but a little better known. There were players who actually recorded Matiegka early on, which I didn't become aware of until I think after I made my recording. But Massimo Agostinelli in Italy, Dana Chivers, who's I think American but lived in Switzerland, maybe still does, um, and Agustin Maruri in Spain. They all made recordings of Matiegka early on, and people knew about some guitarists knew about Matiegka in Europe, but almost nobody in the U.S. did.
Well, it's a really wonderful contribution that you've made. I think that the program, the totality of what you've done, is extremely fine, and I can't wait to get my hands on the CD, because I'm one who likes the entire concept rather than trolling through iTunes or Spotify and trying to find the next one. That's that's a more contemporary experience that I have not been too attracted to myself.
Mm.
So I really want to thank you so much for sharing your CD and its new digital release. For those of you who have followed this interview, in the notes on the YouTube release, there will be links to David's website, which is fantastically well developed, and it has all of his recordings, but it also has links for this particular album, the Beethoven of the Guitar. So
Yes, and by the way, it also contains the liner notes for the album, which if they're hearing it on Spotify or Apple or some other digital place, they won't get those liner notes unless they look at my website under Performer Recordings. It's the fourth one down. You scroll down, and there it is, liner notes. So
I yes, I did exactly that, and the notes are extensive, very informative, and really I really appreciate them, particularly for this guy, f- who there's really almost no one who has a large reservoir of knowledge about him. There's just a few people now, I think, that do, and
yes,
so on. So
yes.
again, thank you so much for joining us, David, and we will hopefully meet again before too long.
Hope
And so
so.
much appreciated.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. It's been a delight, as always. Thank you.
Talk to you later.
Okay.
Thank you.